Good evening, my name is Emil Morano, and I will be your host tonight for this short 4-part segment of True Ghost Tales. No one really knows who Resurrection Mary actually was in life. The legend goes that around 1930 there was a dance one evening at the old O. Henry Ballroom, now called the Willowbrook Ballroom, in suburban Willow Springs, Illinois, outside the Chicago city limits. 20-year-old Mary spent the night dancing with her boyfriend. At some point they got into an argument and Mary stormed out. She walked down Archer Avenue, heading home. Her mind preoccupied, probably due to the fight she had with her beau, she was struck and killed by a car, to be later interred inside Resurrection Cemetery. A few years later, stories of her restless ghost often seen hitchhiking down Archer Avenue began circulating. To be later interred inside Resurrection Cemetery. A few years later, stories of her restless ghost often seen hitchhiking down Archer Avenue began circulating. Many young men, smitten by the blonde beauty walking alone down the empty road late on cold, moonless nights, stopped to offer her rides. Destination, Resurrection Cemetery. A man named Jerry Pallas, a Chicago Southsider, related one famous tale, actually the first reported sighting of Mary. Jerry was alone in the old Henry Ballroom sometime in 1936 when he saw Mary across the ballroom floor. Gathering up his courage, he went over and asked her to dance. According to Jerry, the two of them tripped a light fantastic that evening. He offered her a ride home after the dance and she accepted. When Jerry asked Mary where she lived, Mary simply replied, "Just keep driving down Archer Avenue." Suddenly, a mile later, she cried out, "Stop!" Jerry braked and turned to look outside his window. Beside him were the front gates of Resurrection Cemetery. When he turned back to look at Mary, her seat was empty. She was gone. She had never even opened the door to get out. Jerry would later recall that Mary's skin was icy cold. Another sighting involves a Chicago cabbie who saw Mary walking on Archer Avenue on a snow-swept January night. He was shocked by her attire. Mary was wearing a sleeveless ball gown, and on such a frigid evening. Feeling sorry for the girl, he gave her a free ride in his taxi. He remembered that her responses were vague and evasive as he tried to talk with her. One thing the taxi driver did recall her saying was, "The snow came early this year." She finally asked him to stop, and he did, right across the street from, you guessed it, Resurrection Cemetery. "Where are you going?" the cabbie asked her as Mary was getting out of the car. Her chilling reply was, "Where I'm going, you can't follow." Then, in wide-eyed wonder, he watched the blonde run across the street, right through the cemetery gates before vanishing into thin air. There are many such accounts, told by what are sworn to be credible eyewitnesses. One last true story involves 4 people who saw the spirit in the early hours of the morning. 2 couples were traveling past when they noticed a blonde girl from behind, walking down Archer Avenue. They drove by her, and one of the women happened to look back to view the girl's face. She suddenly screamed. Where Mary's face should have been was nothing but a black void surrounded by blonde curls. The old Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel, built during the golden era of Hollywood in 1926. It opened its doors for the first time on May 15, 1927. Throughout its history, many celebrities have stayed there, including Marilyn Monroe, Errol Flynn, and Montgomery Clift. Not only did these personalities leave a lasting impression there in life, but some also left one after death. There used to be a mirror on the first floor of the hotel that was since taken out. It was said that whenever one looked at their reflection in this ordinary-looking piece of glass, over their shoulder they could often see the ghost of Marilyn Monroe staring back at them. While filming the movie From Here to Eternity, actor Montgomery Clift stayed in room 928 on the 9th floor of the Hollywood Roosevelt. He used to walk up and down the hallway outside his temporary quarters, reading and practicing his lines from the script. Many guests have reported his spirit doing exactly that, moving up and down the corridor, either rehearsing his lines or blowing the bugle his character played in the old war film. Those who have stayed in the room say Monty's made his presence felt by turning up the heat or switching on the alarm clock radio. These are 2 of many such reported hauntings in the old hotel. I've stayed there myself but never witnessed anything strange. Yet, who knows, maybe you might. If you're interested in getting a room at the old Hollywood Roosevelt during your next vacation to LA, it's located at 7000 Hollywood Boulevard, right across from the old Grauman's Chinese Theater. You can book your room online at hollywoodroosevelt.com. Still here, are you? Well, my next tale involves 4 college girls returning to their dorm rooms late one night. This one's called The Gadianton Canyon Incident. In May of 1972, 4 girls were coming back from a rodeo, hoping to make it to their dorm rooms before curfew. Their 1971 Chevy Nova was heading down Utah Highway 56. As the high cliffs enclosed them, the Nova kept going. Suddenly, the canyon came to a dead end. Right in front of the car was a high rock surface. They had no choice but to turn the vehicle around and double back the way they'd come. As the girls returned, the rocky walls disappeared and the landscape unexpectedly changed. Instead of desert mesas and sagebrush, they were now traveling past grain fields, and there was a full moon in the sky. The black tarmac had altered also. The Nova's tires were now rolling over white concrete. In fact, the girls didn't know where they were. As the grain fields came to an end, streets ablaze with neon lights appeared. On the side of the road, the co-eds noticed a small restaurant. Its brilliantly lighted signboard was in a language none of them recognized, and the writing was odd. The letters were squiggles, sort of like hieroglyphics. Confused, they pulled in to ask for directions. As the Nova came to a halt, the restaurant doors opened and people streamed out. They appeared upset as they pointed angrily and gestured wildly at the women inside the vehicle. In spite of this, one of the girls rolled her window down and poked her head out to make inquiries. Before she could even open her mouth, she shrieked with horror. "Punch it," she shouted at the girl driving the Nova. The car sped off. As they got back on the odd white paved highway, radiant beams brightened the interior of the Chevy from behind. They looked back to see 4 egg-shaped vehicles on tripod wheels pursuing them. "Hurry, they're after us," screamed the girl who'd cried out back at the restaurant. "What was it you saw?" asked the driver. "They weren't human," the girl answered, close to tears and hysteria. "They weren't people." As they kept driving, somehow, the scenery shifted once more, and they were back moving past the towering canyon walls and the rocky red mesas. The panicked driver lost control of the car and crashed in the desert. They were alone, but the unusual automobiles were no longer pursuing them. The girls stayed in the Nova until dawn when they flagged down a highway patrol officer. The girls related their weird encounter to the female officer, who took down what they said but didn't believe a word of it. Nevertheless, one of the Chevy's hubcaps was missing and not to be found in the wide area. Perhaps it was lost in that other parallel universe the girls seemed to have momentarily crossed into. During the summer of 1964, actress Elke Summer and her husband, Hollywood columnist Joe Hyams, moved into a quaint house located on Benedict Canyon in Beverly Hills, California. The haunting began July 6, 1964, while the actress was entertaining a female journalist from Germany. The visiting woman saw a man standing in the doorway, staring at her. He was described as having a thinning hairline and a bulbous nose. There wasn't anyone else inside the house that day. Most nights, while Elke and her husband relaxed in bed, sounds of chairs being pushed back, as if a dinner party had suddenly ended, came from the downstairs dining room. Whenever they descended to investigate, the chairs were in place, and all was still on the first level of the house. Once, while the couple were away, a friend named Gordon Mueller stayed in the house. He let the pair know, when they had returned from vacation in Yugoslavia, that every time he had stepped inside the dining room, it never failed to raise the hairs on the back of his neck. Mueller also complained of hearing strange noises coming from the first floor, and that a window in his bedroom that he had locked the previous night was wide open at dawn. The nightly chair-scraping noises went on as the couple settled back into the house after being gone for a month. One night, while Elke and her husband were asleep, someone pounded on the bedroom door, loud enough to wake both of them up. When Mr. Hyams opened it, smoke entered. An inexplicable fire had started in the home. Fortunately, he and Elke were able to escape from the blaze through a second-story window. The pair moved out of the house after that. They'd had enough of their ghostly visiting. And this concludes our 4-part segment of Ghostly Tales in America. I tried to pick the most popular and interesting ones. I hope you enjoyed having your hair stand on end, because that means I really did a good job. All of these tales I talked about can be Googled, so you can explore them for yourselves. Good night and sleep well.